There are goals inside you that never actually died. They were not destroyed. They were not proven impossible. They were not taken by time. They were buried under rent, buried under disappointment, buried under other people's caution, buried under that exhausting word you kept calling wisdom when it was really survival, realistic. And now you move through your days doing what needs to be done, saying what sounds mature, handling what is urgent, checking every box you once thought would make you feel secure. And yet something in you still feels strangely empty. Not lazy, not broken, empty, because part of your life force got sealed away with the dream you told yourself you had outgrown. So let me say this clearly. You did not lose your ambition. You buried it for safety, because hoping started to hurt. Trying started to feel humiliating, and carrying a dream that was not happening on your timeline started to feel heavier than pretending you no longer wanted it. But that goal is still down there, still breathing, still waiting, still carrying instructions for the person you were meant to become. And today we are not going to rip your whole life apart trying to become a different person by tomorrow. We are going to do something wiser than that. We are going to bring that buried goal back to life carefully, honestly, and without burning out your nervous system in the process. Because the dream is not the problem, the burial is. There is a difference between a dead goal and a dormant one. A dead goal has no life in it anymore. It belongs to an old identity, an old season, an old understanding of yourself. You can think about it without feeling anything move inside your chest. It is complete. It is finished. It served its purpose. But a dormant goal is different. A dormant goal still reacts when you hear someone else doing the thing you once wanted to do. A dormant goal still rises in your throat when life gets quiet. A dormant goal still visits you in random moments, while driving, while washing dishes, while staring at the ceiling at night, when the noise of your responsibilities fades just enough for your deeper self to speak. And that is the first thing you need to understand. The reason this still haunts you is not because you are immature. It is not because you are dissatisfied with normal life. It is not because you are ungrateful for what you already have. It is because something true was interrupted. Let me ask you something, and I do not want you to answer this from the surface. I want you to answer it from the place in you that still remembers. What dream did you abandon 3 years ago? Not the safe goal, not the practical one, not the cleaned up version you mentioned when people asked what you were working on. What did you really want? Was it the business, the book, the ministry, the move, the training, the degree, the art, the channel, the healing, the life you pictured when your heart was still allowed to speak before it had to defend itself? Because the truth is, most people do not abandon their deepest goals because those goals are impossible. They abandon them because hoping hurts. That is the twist nobody says out loud. You did not bury that dream because reality gave you a clean and final answer. You buried it because staying emotionally connected to it became too painful. You got tired of wanting something that was not moving. You got tired of explaining yourself. You got tired of the gap between your current life and your inner vision. You got tired of the private embarrassment of trying. You got tired of telling yourself this would be the year, only to watch another year pass. So instead of grieving honestly, you became strategic. You called it maturity. You called it acceptance. You called it timing. You called it wisdom. But deep down, what you really did was place your dream in emotional storage so you could function without feeling the ache of it every day. That is why buried goals are so confusing. They do not feel dramatic. They feel reasonable. You do not announce the funeral. You just slowly stop bringing it up. You stop researching. You stop making room for it. You stop letting your mind go there. You start rolling your eyes at the version of you that once believed in it. And after a while, you become so adapted to living without that part of yourself that you start calling numbness peace. But numbness is not peace. Peace feels alive. Peace has breath in it. Peace has room for longing without shame. Numbness is just pain that learned how to sit still. So how do you know whether a goal is dormant and waiting to be resurrected? There are 3 signs. The first sign is this. You still feel grief around it, not constant grief, not dramatic grief, but a quiet ache, a strange sadness when you see evidence of what could have been. A tightening in your chest when you realize how long you have been away from the thing that once made you feel most like yourself. If there is grief, there is usually still meaning. The second sign is this: you keep returning to it in secret. You may not talk about it publicly anymore. You may have even built a whole identity around being over it, but privately, you still revisit it. You still imagine alternate timelines. You still wonder whether it is too late. You still search for small signs that maybe the door is not fully closed. A buried gold does not stop whispering. It just learns to whisper from underground. And the third sign is this: your energy changes when you talk about it honestly. Watch what happens when you stop pretending. Watch what happens when you say the real thing out loud, even if only to yourself. Your face changes, your breathing changes, your attention sharpens. There is fear, yes. There is sadness, yes. But there is also electricity, life, charge. That is the signal. Buried things can still carry power. So let us recap this clearly. A dormant goal usually leaves 3 fingerprints. You still grieve it. You still return to it in secret. And something in you still comes alive when you name it. If those signs are there, then you are not dealing with a fantasy. You are dealing with unfinished life. Now here is where most people go wrong. They think the next step is to ask, can I still have this? But that is not the first question. The first question is, what buried this? Because if you do not understand what helped you let go of your own vision, you will try to resurrect the goal while leaving the burial system intact. And the same forces that put it underground the first time will quietly drag it back down again. Sometimes the executioner was a moment, a rejection, a breakup, a financial collapse, a season of illness, a public failure, a humiliating launch, an unanswered prayer, a year where survival became more urgent than becoming. But sometimes the executioner was not a moment. Sometimes it was a voice. And that voice got so familiar you started calling it your own. Maybe it sounded like practicality. Maybe it sounded like be smart. Maybe it sounded like this is not the time. Maybe it sounded like focus on what is stable. Maybe it sounded like not everyone gets to do what they love. Maybe it sounded like stop making your life harder than it has to be. Now hear me carefully. Practicality is not evil. Wisdom matters. Responsibilities matter. Bills matter. Timing matters. But practicality can become a costume fear wears when it wants to remain unquestioned. That is why you have to separate true wisdom from protective shrinking. True wisdom says, build slowly. Fear says, do not begin. True wisdom says, adjust the method. Fear says, abandon the vision. True wisdom says, respect your limits. Fear says, never test them again. True wisdom says, create a sustainable path. Fear says, make sure you can never be disappointed twice. Do you see the difference? One voice helps you move wisely. The other helps you stay buried politely. And the tragedy is that fear sounds most intelligent after pain. After you have failed once, caution feels righteous. After you have been embarrassed, hiding feels mature. After you have lost time, lowering your expectations feels responsible. But just because a voice kept you safe does not mean it can lead you into life. And there is another executioner you need to identify. People. Not always cruel people. Not always controlling people. Sometimes just frightened people. Limited people. People who loved you from the level of their own wounds. People who gave you advice that matched the size of their own courage. So let me ask you a question that may explain more than you realize. Who was the first person to call you unrealistic? Who was the first person to look at your hunger and try to reduce it? Who was the first person to hear your dream and answer it with a sigh? Who was the first person who made you feel foolish for wanting more than stability? Who was the first person who confused your longing with immaturity? Because many people did not bury their goals in private. They buried them in relationship. They learned that certain desires got punished. Certain visions got mocked. Certain hopes made the room uncomfortable. So they adapted. They learned how to speak smaller. They learned how to explain themselves less. They learned how to share only what would not invite resistance. And once that pattern is in you, you start doing the silencing before anyone else even has to. You become your own censor, your own minimizer, your own early warning system against disappointment. Then there is one more executioner, and this one hides in plain sight because modern life normalizes it. Comparison. Comparison was the shovel. You did not just feel delayed, you felt outpaced. You watched people younger than you move faster. You watched people with fewer responsibilities take bigger risks. You watched people with cleaner stories, better timing, more support, more money, more confidence, more visibility, and suddenly your dream did not just feel difficult. It felt ridiculous. That is what comparison does. It takes a living desire and makes it feel inappropriate. It turns your private timing into a public humiliation. It convinces you that because someone else bloomed earlier, your seed is defective. It makes you interpret another person's visibility as evidence against your own future. But another person's movement is not a prophecy about your ending. And this is crucial because many buried goals were not surrendered because the person no longer cared. They were surrendered because comparison made caring feel embarrassing. That is why some of you do not need more motivation. You need disentanglement. You need to separate your dream from the timeline you were using to measure its worth. You need to separate your desire from the people you were using as proof that you were behind. You need to separate your calling from your humiliation story. Because a dream can survive delay. A dream can survive detours. A dream can survive a slower beginning. What crushes it is chronic self-contempt. The moment you start viewing your own desire through the lens of shame, you stop nurturing it. You stop protecting it. You stop feeding it. And eventually, you call that neglect realism. But realism was never the full story. The full story is that your dream met pain, your desire met fear, your hope met voices, your timing met comparison. And somewhere along the way, you decided it was safer to become a person who no longer expected much from life. That decision may have helped you survive, but it cannot be the place you build your future from. Because buried goals do not disappear cleanly. They leak. They leak into resentment. They leak into boredom. They leak into low-grade envy. They leak into emotional flatness. They leak into the strange exhaustion that comes from being outwardly functional and inwardly disconnected. And if you are feeling that now, I do not believe the answer is to shame yourself for waiting. I believe the answer is to tell the truth. The goal was buried. It was not erased. And once you can admit that, once you can name the dream, once you can identify the voices, the fear, the comparison, the protective logic, then something powerful begins to happen. The grave starts losing its authority, because what is named can be confronted. What is confronted can be untangled, and what is untangled can be raised. That is where we are going next. Not into fantasy, not into reckless reinvention, not into a dramatic overnight comeback. We are going into the hidden wrappings around this dream, the lies that got tied around it, the shame that got wrapped over it, the old failure story that made you think touching it again would reopen every wound. And piece by piece, we are going to remove what never belonged to your future in the first place. Before a buried goal can live again, it has to come out of the story that buried it, because most forgotten dreams are not lying underground by themselves. They are wrapped in grave clothes, old conclusions, old shame, old interpretations, old sentences you repeated so many times they began to sound like facts. And if you try to restart the dream without removing those wrappings, you will touch it for a day, maybe a week, maybe a month, and then the old pressure will tighten around it again until you cannot breathe near it. So this part matters. You do not just need motivation, you need unwrapping. There are usually 3 lies wrapped around a buried goal. The first lie is this: if it did not happen then, it cannot happen now. That lie sounds convincing because time is emotional. Time makes everything feel heavier. It makes delay feel like disqualification. It makes you think you had one window, one chance, one clean season, and because you did not move perfectly in that season, the whole thing is over. But delay is not the same thing as death. A late beginning is still a beginning. A slower path is still a path. An altered timeline is still movement. Some of you are grieving a version of your goal that was attached to youth, speed, visibility, or ideal conditions. And yes, that version may be gone. That exact fantasy may not return. That clean, glamorous, uninterrupted route may no longer be available. But that does not mean the deeper goal is gone. It may simply need a humbler doorway. The second lie is this: because I failed before, I am now the kind of person who fails here. Notice how cruel that lie is. It takes an event and turns it into an identity. It takes something that happened and turns it into who you are. It takes one chapter and tries to rename the whole book. You tried and it fell apart. You launched and nobody came. You wrote and stopped. You trained and quit. You believed and got hurt. You made a move and had to reverse it. So now part of you assumes the evidence is in. I'm not disciplined enough. I'm not built for this. I'm not consistent enough. I do not finish. I always sabotage myself. I always get excited and then disappear. But that is not wisdom. That is self-condemnation dressed up as pattern recognition. A past failure can teach you. It cannot define the full range of who you are becoming unless you keep worshiping it as prophecy. And the third lie is this: if I try again, I have to try at the old size. This one traps many people. Because the old version of the goal was dramatic. Big launch, big leap, big announcement, big sacrifice, big pressure, big stakes. And your nervous system remembers that. It remembers the adrenaline. It remembers the crash. It remembers how exposed you felt. It remembers the disappointment, the exhaustion, the shame of losing momentum in public or even in private. So when you think about trying again, your body does not hear gentle reactivation. It hears danger. It hears another unsustainable sprint. It hears another season of obsession, collapse, and self-blame. That is why some goals stay buried for years. Not because you do not care, but because your body associates the dream with overload. So let us recap the 3 lies clearly. If it did not happen then, it cannot happen now. Because I failed before, I am the kind of person who fails here. If I try again, I have to try at the old size. Those lies have to come off. And this is where forgiveness becomes necessary. Not sentimental forgiveness. Not pretending nothing happened. Not erasing the cost. Real forgiveness. You may need to forgive the version of you that overestimated what you could carry. The version of you that thought passion alone could replace process. The version of you that wanted the outcome so badly that you ignored your own limits. The version of you that attached your entire worth to whether the thing worked fast. You may need to forgive yourself for being naive, for being inconsistent, for disappearing, for quitting without closure, for not knowing then what you know now. Because if you do not forgive your former self, you will keep approaching the stream like a courtroom. Every new attempt will be cross-examined by the memory of who you were. Every small action will have to prove that you are not that person anymore. And eventually, that pressure will become too heavy and you will retreat again. Forgiveness is not lowering the standard. It is removing the poison from the memory. It is saying, yes, I mishandled parts of this. Yes, I was immature in places. Yes, I broke trust with myself. Yes, I made choices that delayed me. But I do not need to keep bleeding at the sight of every old mistake in order to be honest about it. Some of you are still standing over an old failure like it is sacred ground. Still bowing to it. Still letting it tell you what is possible. Still using it as final evidence against your future. But failure is a scene, not a throne. It should not rule you forever. And now let me ask you something that will decide whether this goal can come back to life in a form you can actually sustain. Can you accept a smaller starting line? Can you accept beginning in a way that does not impress anyone? Can you accept a version so small your ego gets no applause from it? Can you accept a path that looks almost embarrassingly ordinary compared to what you once imagined? Because resurrection rarely begins with spectacle. It begins with breath. A pulse, a flicker, a first movement, a tiny sign of life. And people miss their new beginning because they keep waiting for it to resemble the old fantasy. They say, I will restart when I have a perfect plan. I will restart when I have more time. I will restart when I can do it properly. I will restart when I feel confident again. I will restart when I can make a real move. But buried goals do not come back through dramatic declarations. They come back through repeated contact. This is why the next step is not to rebuild your whole life in one weekend. That is how you re-traumatize yourself. That is how you turn a sacred return into another nervous system emergency. The next step is a reactivation window. 15 minutes. Not because 15 minutes is magical, because 15 minutes is survivable. 15 minutes is small enough to bypass the panic that says this dream will consume your life again. 15 minutes is light enough to fit inside a real schedule. 15 minutes is humble enough to expose whether you actually want the goal or just the fantasy of being the kind of person who has it. And that matters, because this is not about mood, it is about reconnection. Your only task in the reactivation phase is to make daily contact with the buried goal, not master it, not monetize it, not explain it, not make it impressive. Touch it, write for 15 minutes, research for 15 minutes, practice for 15 minutes, sketch for 15 minutes, study for 15 minutes, study for 15 minutes, train for 15 minutes, attain for 15 minutes, build for 15 minutes. No multitasking, no performance, no rushing, no trying to make up for lost years in one burst of guilt-driven effort, just pure contact. Now here is the twist that will protect you. Do not sprint, or your nervous system will crash. That is not weakness, that is biology meeting history. When a dream has been buried for a long time, waking it up can release more than inspiration. It can release grief, regret, anger, excitement, pressure, fear, a desperate urge to compensate for lost time, and that cocktail can trick you into overcommitting. Suddenly you want to redesign your whole week, buy all the equipment, tell everybody, wake up at 5, do 2 hours a day, become a new person by Monday. But intensity is not proof of transformation. Sometimes intensity is just panic in spiritual clothing. You do not need an emotional explosion. You need a trustworthy rhythm, because the goal is not to prove devotion for 3 days. The goal is to become safe enough for the dream to return permanently. Read that again in your spirit. You are not trying to impress your dream. You are trying to become a safe place for it to live again. A safe place is consistent. A safe place is calm. A safe place does not use inspiration like a whip. A safe place does not demand immediate, visible results. A safe place honors the fact that something fragile is returning to life. So here is the daily micro-habit. Same time if possible. Same place if possible. Same tiny doorway every day. You lower the friction. You remove the drama. You create a repeatable ritual so your body stops associating the goal with chaos. Maybe it is 15 minutes at the kitchen table before anyone wakes up. Maybe it is 15 minutes in your car after work before you walk inside. Maybe it is 15 minutes at night with your phone turned over and one notebook open. Maybe it is 15 minutes of training shoes on, timer set, no negotiation. Maybe it is 15 minutes of filming, outlining, singing, coding, reading, building, designing, praying, drafting. It does not matter if it feels small. Small is how trust is rebuilt, because right now, the dream does not need your intensity. It needs proof that you will return tomorrow. That is what consistency says. I am back. I am not here to force you. I am not here to make promises I cannot keep. I am not here to binge on hope and disappear at the first sign of resistance. I am here again today. That message changes everything. And let me give you a picture of what 15 minutes of pure focus actually looks like, because many people ruin small beginnings by contaminating them with perfectionism. You sit down. You decide the one thing. You do only that one thing. You do not check messages. You do not optimize your whole system. You do not wander into 10 related tasks and call it productivity. You do not spend 12 of the 15 minutes getting emotionally ready. You enter. You stay. You finish the window. You leave. That is all. If you are writing, you write, even if it is clumsy. If you are rebuilding a business, you do one concrete action. If you are trying to learn again, you study the lesson in front of you. If you are reviving your body, you complete the movement you planned. If you are returning to a calling, you make direct contact with the work instead of circling it with emotional speeches. 15 focused minutes done honestly will resurrect more of your life than 3 hours of scattered guilt. And after a while, something beautiful begins to happen. The goal stops feeling mythical. It stops feeling like a ghost from your old life. It stops feeling like a courtroom, a fantasy, a private wound. It becomes real again, not because it is finished, because it is back in relationship with you. This is how buried dreams rise, not with noise, with repeated breath. And once you start doing this, once the goal is no longer only memory but contact, another layer will surface. Pushback, embarrassment, inner mockery, a strange voice asking who you think you are, a sudden desire to hide your efforts, even from yourself, a discomfort that has nothing to do with the task and everything to do with identity. That is normal, because the moment you begin to move again, the old self that adapted to disappointment will not go silent immediately. It will speak. And in the next part, we are going to deal with that voice directly, lock in momentum, and protect this resurrection long enough for it to become a new reality instead of another almost. The hardest part of resurrecting a buried goal is not the work. It is the shame. It is the strange embarrassment of trying again at an age, in a season, or after a delay you never planned for. It is the private cringe you feel when you catch yourself caring again. It is the part of you that would rather stay quietly disappointed than be seen reaching for something you once failed to hold. That is why trying again can feel so humiliating. Not because the goal is wrong, because the old wound still remembers being exposed. You are not just returning to a dream. You are returning to the place where your identity once got bruised. And when that happens, the first critic to speak will not usually be another person. It will be the old version of you, the version that adapted to disappointment, the version that learned how to numb out, the version that made peace with less because wanting more felt dangerous, the version that built a whole personality around being low maintenance, practical, unbothered, realistic, detached. That version will speak loudly the moment you begin moving again. It will say, "Here we go again." It will say, "Do not be dramatic." It will say, "Remember what happened last time." It will say, "You are too late." It will say, "This is embarrassing." It will say, "Who do you think you are?" And you need to understand something that will save you. That voice is not your enemy because it is evil. It is your enemy because it is outdated. It was built for survival, not resurrection. It learned how to keep you from the pain of hope. It learned how to protect you from exposure. It learned how to prevent another collapse by making sure you never fully re-entered the arena. So when it criticizes you, do not panic. Do not treat that voice like prophecy. Treat it like an old security system going off because a locked room has finally been opened. The alarm is loud, but the alarm is not always accurate. This is how you silence the inner saboteur. You do not argue with every thought. You do not build a whole philosophy every time fear speaks. You do not wait until you feel fully confident. You answer the voice with evidence, not grand evidence, quiet evidence. I showed up today. I kept the promise. I did the 15 minutes. I returned again. I did not vanish. I am building trust now. I am not that exact version of me anymore. That is how momentum is protected, because momentum is not just movement. It is self-belief becoming embodied, and self-belief does not usually return through affirmations alone. It returns through kept appointments with yourself. That is why silent victories matter so much. Nobody may clap for them. Nobody may notice them. Nobody may understand what they cost, but they count. The day you work for 15 minutes when you almost skip counts. The day you sit down while feeling foolish counts. The day you resist the urge to overdo it counts. The day you keep going without needing emotional fireworks counts. The day you come back after a bad day counts. The day you do it tired, messy, unimpressed, and still present counts. These are not small things. These are resurrection metrics. Because the dream is not only being revived in public results, it is being revived in private faithfulness. So track the silent victories. Track what used to break you but did not break you today. Track the promises you kept. Track the moments you returned instead of disappearing. Track the new evidence that says you are becoming someone steadier than before. This matters because the mind loves dramatic outcomes. But transformation is usually quieter than that. If you only measure success by visible breakthroughs, you will miss the holy thing that is happening underneath. Your capacity is being rebuilt, and there is another question you may need to ask yourself if you want this early stage to survive. Who do you need to hide this from? Not forever. Not from a place of fear, but from unnecessary exposure while the root is still fragile. Because not every dream needs immediate witnesses. Not every beginning needs announcement. Not every reactivation needs community right away. Some goals die young because they were spoken too early around people who could not hold them properly. People who mock. People who advise too quickly. People who project their fear. People who need you to stay the same so they can feel comfortable. People who only know how to respond to your becoming with skepticism or sarcasm or subtle diminishment. Privacy is not always secrecy. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes wisdom looks like letting the dream breathe in a quiet room before you carry it into public air. You do not owe everybody access to your unfinished resurrection. Some things need roots before they need witnesses, and now let me tell you the truth that will lock momentum in place when your mind tries to shame you for how long this took. The delay was not only delay, it was incubation. Yes, some of it was fear. Yes, some of it was avoidance. Yes, some of it was grief and confusion and self-protection. But not all waiting is wasted. There were parts of you that had to grow in the dark. There were lessons you could not have learned in your original timeline. There was strength you did not yet have. There was humility you did not yet have. There was discernment you did not yet have. There was patience you did not yet have. There was a deeper relationship with yourself you did not yet have. And if the dream had fully arrived in the first season you wanted it, maybe you would have touched it with the wrong hands. Maybe you would have built it from ego. Maybe you would have burned out trying to sustain what your character had not yet learned how to carry. So stop calling every delay a disqualification. Some things were maturing underground. A seed in the soil does not look impressive. It looks buried. It looks absent. It looks lost. But burial and incubation can look almost identical from the surface. The difference is life. And if there is still life in this goal, then the years did not only take from you, they also prepared you. Now here is your activation. Today, I do not want you to rebuild your whole future. I want you to do something more sacred and more powerful. Name the goal plainly, not poetically, not vaguely, not in the language of excuses. Name it. This is the thing I buried. This is the thing I still want. This is the thing I am willing to touch again. Then choose the 15-minute doorway. Choose the time. Choose the place. Choose the exact action. Make it too clear to romanticize and too small to fear. And when you do it, do not ask whether it is enough. Do not ask whether it is impressive. Do not ask whether it guarantees the final outcome. Ask only this: did I come back to life a little today? Because that is what this is really about. Not just finishing a project, not just reaching a milestone, not just proving people wrong. It is about recovering the part of you that had to go quiet in order to survive. It is about ending the agreement with the smaller life you accepted while wounded. It is about refusing to confuse numbness with peace. It is about becoming someone who can hold desire again without collapsing under it. It is about letting hope return in a form your spirit and your nervous system can both survive. So do not wait for the perfect surge of confidence. Do not wait for a cleaner season. Do not wait for everyone to understand. Do not wait for the fear to disappear completely. Begin before you feel grand. Begin before you feel ready in the old dramatic way. Begin softly. Begin truthfully. Begin in a way that lets you come back tomorrow, because the goal you forgot may still be carrying the shape of who you are meant to become. And one day, if you honor this return, you are going to look back at the years you called lost and realize something astonishing. The dream was never dead. It was waiting for a version of you that knew how to raise it gently. So go back for it. Go back for the buried page. Go back for the neglected gift. Go back for the skill, the vision, the calling, the work, the training, the obedience, the creation, the becoming. Go back without self-hatred. Go back without trying to punish yourself into progress. Go back without the old violence. Go back with steadiness. Go back with honesty. Go back with breath. And when that old voice asks who you think you are, answer it with your actions. I am the one who returned. I am the one who dug through the dirt. I am the one who stopped calling fear wisdom. I am the one who came back for what still had life in it. I am the one who will keep showing up until this buried thing breathes again. And if this found you at the exact moment you needed permission to begin, let this be it. Not permission to be reckless. Permission to be resurrected.